All right, we're on chapter 3 of Christ's Mission as Our Mission by Peter Judd. Chapter 3 is Proclaim Release to the Captives. And are you hearing me okay today, Jonathan? I know there was something with a fuzzy sound.
You sound clear, yes.
Okay. So, the scripture that we've been looking at in this book is, of course, Luke 4:18, not 18 through 19, but it's a little bit more than that. Or maybe it is 18 and 19. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set free those who are oppressed, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. And today we're going to be looking specifically at that statement right in the middle. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives. So think about what being captive is like and what being freed from captivity might feel like. So let's just compare a couple of different translations that Brother Judd brought to our attention in the chapter. First of all, from Isaiah, this is the original scripture from which Jesus was quoting as he read from the scroll in the synagogue that day. And it says, proclaim liberty to the captives and release to the prisoners. Now, does that say more than one thing to you? Is that two different things, or is it just saying the same thing in two different ways? Proclaim liberty to the captives and release to the prisoners.
To me, it's basically the same thing said different ways.
Same thing, different way. Okay. Anybody else?
To me, it's two different things.
What's that, Jonathan?
To me, it's two different things. You can be, for instance, Israel were a nation of captives, but they weren't in prison.
Yeah.
Okay. That's what I would have thought as well, that being captive is different. I mean, obviously, when you are a prisoner, you're being held captive, but maybe captivity is a broader definition, and being a prisoner is a little more specific. We think of somebody in jail.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, that you can be captive and like slavery or, oppressed or something like that. Doesn't mean you're in jail.
Okay. And we'll talk about lots of different ways to interpret captivity in our lives that have nothing to do with being held in the county jail or anything like that. And then here's the differences between 5 different translations. The one that I used was from the New Revised Standard Version. This is 5 other translations, and the King James says, preach deliverance to the captives. The Revised English Bible, with which I'm not terribly familiar, says proclaim release for the prisoners. The Good News Bible says proclaim liberty to the captives. The New International Version, proclaim freedom for the prisoners. And the Message says announce pardon to prisoners. So again, is that just more than one way of saying the same thing, or do those sound like 5 different interpretations of the passage?
The King James Version, preach deliverance to the captives, makes me think more that you're preaching deliverance from sin rather than from being a prisoner.
So that would be one good interpretation, one way to interpret.
I guess to me, captive is all-inclusive, which includes those of us who aren't behind prison bars, but it also includes the prisoners because they are also being held captive. So I guess I think captive is a all-encompassing term.
Good.
Are the critical words in each of these sentences being used primarily as nouns or verbs or both? So liberty, deliverance, release, liberty, freedom, and pardon. What parts of the sentence that you learned in 5th grade or somewhere way back when you had to diagram sentences in elementary school?
I used to love it.
Got to do it.
I love diagramming.
Is there a difference, and does it?
Well, the subject, which is never stated, is you, because you're directing it at the audience. Proclaim is the verb. Liberty is the direct object. To the is the proposition. What are you asking? Sorry.
I'm just asking the 5 words, the different words, liberty, deliverance, release, liberty, freedom, pardon. Are those verbs, adverbs, nouns, action words, or things, person, place, or thing? You're welcome to
All
sit
the
there.
above.
It's just an inner computer.
Well, yeah, as Ryan said, proclaim, preach, announce, I consider those verbs.
To me, they sound like mostly nouns.
Yeah.
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 Liberty.
But do they have different meanings then? Are they different in what they mean? Is pardon different than freedom? Pardon kind of implies that maybe you've offended somebody or done something for which you require forgiveness. If we're proclaiming freedom, doesn't designate why someone was a prisoner. It just says you can go now. Open the jail cell and get out of here.
Mhm.
Liberty has, to me, kind of a broader meaning. We think about what it means to have liberty in a country that values that. It's more than just being held captive. It's the ability to choose for oneself, the ability to pursue the life that you want to live. All I'm trying to point out is these are different words to me. And it's interesting that the people who did the translations interpreted them thusly,
Well,
trying to figure out what they were thinking.
they're abstract words, that's why we're having a hard time probably putting
Okay.
kind of a connection to them.
Paul,
Yes.
to me, there's also a significant difference between preaching deliverance to the captives. It doesn't help the captives. You're preaching at them versus, announcing their pardon or they're proclaiming their liberty.
Okay.
Oh, those are definitely different.
Yeah, we could, I mean, I guess we could talk about that too, because preaching sort of has one connotation. Proclamation sounds like a king comes out and proclaims, okay, captives can go free now. An announcement, anybody can make an announcement, right?
Oh, what,
We make announcements before church.
what did preach mean in 1611 or whatever? King James?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Okay, well, I won't belabor the point. I just wanted to point out that there are some differences, and that possibly the way in which various individuals have translated this passage may change the meaning a little bit to some people. And so it's understandable if we don't quite all see it in the same way. All right, before we get into the discussion about what it means to be freed from captivity, I want to talk about all the different types of captivity that Brother Judd introduces here. Now, the first two, people being incarcerated or in house arrest, he doesn't really talk about that. We know people get sent to prison or jail for doing bad things, or people in bondage where control of one's existence is in the hands of the others. And of course, the story of the Israelites in the hands of the Egyptians is probably the best Old Testament example of being in bondage. But he didn't really talk about those two so much. What he talks about is over on the right-hand side, upper corner, people on the margins of society, possibly due to the greed or the intolerance of others, lots of reasons. Left middle or left-hand side in the middle, people who are captive to their fears. We'll talk about that today. In the middle, people who are captive to their beliefs. On the right-hand side in the middle, people who are captive to tradition. And then on the bottom row, people who are captive to anything new, any new thing. People who are captive to all sorts of addictions, and people who are captive to guilt and shame, which actually we talked about in the previous book on the reunion text that we used for 5 weeks. And he notes that some captivities are specifically at the hands of others. I know you can't see that on the bottom there, but it says some captivities are at the hands of others. Some are self-imposed. And so there are prisons that we might be sent to by the act of another person. Maybe a judge imposes a sentence on us and we have to go serve 6 months for driving too fast or causing an accident or something like that. Other types of captivities are things that we can impose on ourselves. Agree or disagree with that?
Agree, definitely.
All right, so a little bit about captivity and Jewish history. And in Jesus' day, we know that the Israelites were captives in Egypt. That's the great national story. The Israelites, how they were delivered out of bondage by Moses and came to the promised land. But also Israel has had experience with being captive by the Assyrians. That was the northern kingdom in the 8th century BC, and then the southern kingdom was taken over by Babylon, and many people were taken captive into Babylon in the, let's see, last early part of the 6th century BC, 586 BC, something like that. So this is chapter 61 from Isaiah. So chapter 61 is part of the Deutero-Isaiah, which was written during the Babylonian period. So that statement was actually made during a period of captivity. And we have to acknowledge then that, yes, the Israelites were very familiar with that condition. In Jesus' day, the Jews were in their own country. They lived in Israel, but they were in political and economic bondage to the Roman Empire. So even though they weren't doing slave labor, presumably, they still had to answer to another emperor other than their own and follow the political dictates of whoever that individual was at the time. So Israel's original vision of a Messiah was someone who would relieve them of their oppression, even if it was by force. I truly believe that the more zealous Israelites perceived the Messiah was going to be somebody who would bring an army and throw off their allegorical shackles to the Roman Empire, and they would be free to govern themselves at that point. But instead, we don't really see Jesus addressing that part of their captivity. He didn't come riding on a stallion. He came, riding on a donkey, foal of a donkey. There was no spoke against violence. When Peter took up a sword against guards in the Garden of Gethsemane, he said, "Put your swords away. Don't do violent things." So instead, Jesus addressed other forms of captivity that existed within the structure of Jewish life itself. So in Jesus' time, who were the oppressors and how was it that the people were being held captive if he didn't come to address their problems with Rome? Who did Jesus come to set them free from? If he announced this by reading it in the synagogue, he must have had somebody in mind, right?
The power structure of the religion, Pharisees, the Sadducees, the priests, the chief priests, who put burdens.
Okay, so most of Jesus' negative interactions with people were between him and the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the high priests and so forth. They had some pretty interesting discussions from time to time. How do you think that Jesus perceived that the religious structure of the day was oppressing and holding the people captive? Looking for some examples here.
Working on the Sabbath.
So lots of laws and things that were held over people. And so what happened if they violated the Mosaic law?
More burden.
Hmm.
They were burdened with more punishment.
Okay, they were criticized.
Okay.
They possibly became unclean.
Purity.
In some cases, they were ostracized.
Ostracized, yeah. So kind of pushed to the margins of society. So we're going to talk about margins today. Anything else that you can think of?
I think the leadership was oppressed by their own viewpoint that they had it right all the time.
Point to tradition.
Tradition and, you know, sometimes when you look at the law, too hard. You just get stuck in all the details, you know, I mean, can't see the forest through the trees, you get it all time and hour.
What about the sacrificial temple system? We know that Jesus overturned the money changers' tables in the temple in one of the gospels. What was going on there? What was the activity that Jesus was upset about, probably?
Profiteering for those sacrifices.
Yeah, as
Yeah,
often
people
happens, the
poor.
religious elite were profiting from on the backs of the people, the poverty of the poor.
Nickel and dimey, you might say. Because if I recall, you could go to the temple, and if you didn't have an animal, you could purchase dove, pigeon, a small goat, or something like that. But was it the case that you had to have a certain currency or
Yeah.
something? So that's where the money
I
changing.
think that's where the money changing
Yeah.
came in.
Yeah.
They had to use the temple currency to buy the sacrifices with. And so if
Yeah.
you came from Italy or somewhere and wanted to offer a sacrifice, and all you had was lira, or they had in Italy,
So
denarii, yeah, you had to change it to whatever.
so
I'm sure the exchange rate wasn't the
And the
best.
exchange rate was probably,
no.
the exchange rate was probably not fair,
So
either, right?
I guess it became a little micro economy, and there was some corruption.
And we know, Jesus
You know.
criticized the high priests for not taking care of the widows. He said, you guys, you're evil. You take the widows' houses. Then the widows don't have a place to live, so you turn around and charge them rent to stay in the house that they had to donate to the temple because of their debt. There were all kinds of probably very underhanded financial things going on in the temple.
The widow and her 2 mites.
Romans started doing it the same way under Christianity.
Yeah.
We are very plenty of slumlords.
All right, so that's a good discussion, a good background, I think, to keep in mind that we have a sense of what Jesus' purpose was about when it comes to freeing the captives. So let's talk about some of the specifics. One that Brother Judd brings up is people who are on the margins of society, and these are individuals who are imprisoned in quotations by others when select groups adopt rules that prevent some from moving freely and participating fully in the life of the community. You think of some examples from the time of Jesus, groups that were put on the margins of society in that way.
The major one was those with leprosy.
Okay. The people, I don't have them in quite the same order, so let's go ahead and think of some others, and then I'll show you what I have. I think.
Well, the purpose of that was usually here too,
Yeah, right.
but still people got.
Yeah.
It's a card.
Yeah, and it's a very public disease because everybody can see that you have it, right? That's different than having something that's not visible in public.
Tax collectors.
Tax collectors.
Yeah.
Or
Widows.
Americans, okay.
I just know the first time.
Americans.
I don't know.
Okay, I think you've got, well, we include women as well. Okay,
Yeah,
women
women.
did not have
Women
much
are big.
status in those days.
So,
I was also gonna
Very
say.
easily to
prostitutes.
marginalize.
I see such people every day waiting on the bus, and they even get on the bus. And that's one reason they're gonna start charging money now in October. $2 a ride, or they haven't settled on the price, and hopefully senior citizens can still buy a bus pass and whatever. But you have to be very, very careful. I experienced this, and who you talk to, who you interact with, because the other day it started out okay, and then he appeared to be friendly, and then all at once he yelled at me and he said, "You white people, you killed the Indians, you made slaves out of us." He said, "Get out of the country or I'll kill you white people." And he looked at me and said that, and I backed up and stood amongst the 3 beautiful maple trees there at the KU bus stop on 39th on 39th Street on the north side of KU Med Center. And so I backed up, and a lot of times I'll stand among the trees because the shade, you know, this one has been one long hot summer, the hottest that I've ever experienced in my 81 years since 1980. So I'm waiting on the bus. I'll stand amongst the 3 beautiful maple trees that the KU grounds people planted years ago. And so anyway, I got away from him.
So
And
I mean,
then-
you bring up a good point there, Jim. It may well have been that he had a mental health disorder. It sounds like to me that he probably had something going on. And those
Yeah,
are,
mental.
yeah, those
a
are
lot of
people
them
in
have
our
mental
society
problems
that
'cause
very often are
because they
pushed
take dope and
pretty
stuff.
quickly.
You know, so sometimes you try to help people. Just like this other person, first name is James, and he's friendly. In fact, I gave him one of my flyers that I made up. I was going to bring one this morning, but I couldn't find it. And he accepted it and thanked me for it.
Yeah.
I told him that he could get help at right in front of the Westport Library, the Allen Library that was built in 1895. I said, right across the street is the Westport Presbyterian Church. I said, they have all kinds of programs for homeless. But he has to make the decision to go there. And I told him that I knew the pastor because he used to be a pastor in Fort Scott, Kansas, the Presbyterian Church in Fort Scott. Now he's pastor at Westport Presbyterian Church. And so
But you reached out.
all I
to
can
him.
do is give them information if they don't follow up on it.
That's,
And I've done my part.
that's right. You reached out to him, and that's exactly how we bring people back in from the margins, is to offer that kind of help or advice from time to time. So women and Samaritans, tax collectors, I heard tax collectors, anybody who collaborated with Rome, anyone who had a disease or leprosy or could be deemed by the Mosaic law to be
The Gentiles,
unclean. What's that?
the Gentiles.
The Gentiles, yeah, that Samaritans kind of sort of like Gentiles, not quite, but. So can you think, so Jim gave us one pretty good example of an individual with a mental health problem. Other examples in our day of people, the kinds of people who get pushed to the margins in society,
Immigrants.
Yeah.
immigrants,
Big one.
very much so right now, right?
Well, poor, homeless, diseased, anybody that has a visible disease is definitely pushed to the margin.
Mental health.
Mental health, yeah.
I was, thinking, I spoke at Shawnee Drive, and one of the examples that I used of people who were in my great cloud of witnesses, I know you all have testimonies here, but I talked about Jimmy Carter, not so much during his presidential years, but in his more senior years when he worked with Habitat for Humanity. And at 90-some years old, was still putting on his baseball cap and his work tools and swinging a hammer and building houses for the homeless. And then, in our present situation today, we've got police and the military that are pulling the homeless off of the streets of Washington, D.C. Well, we don't know where they're going to end up, but very stark contrast between two approaches. How do you fix a problem like that, right?
I mean, African Americans,
Anybody who doesn't look white and Protestant.
Oh, wait, we've gone after Arabic or, that the 9/11.
Well,
Those that are
you know,
different
You can
world, yeah.
marginalize Jewish people, you can marginalize Palestinians, or you can marginalize all of them. if you
Right.
want, you know, it's-
Disabled people.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and women are still being, looked down on and everything else.
All right, I'm going to move ahead here so we can get through our slides for today. We'll talk a little bit about people who are captive to their fears. Brother Judd, I don't know why this probably mattered to him. His book was written in 2005 or 2006, I believe. And he kind of got on a little discussion of the prevalence of firearms in the U.S. as a sign of how much we're afraid of each other. I think that's probably a reasonable point. I don't think he was trying to question anybody's, Second Amendment rights, and I'm not here to do that either. I do think we have too many guns in this country, but that's a personal opinion and has no bearing. But I think what he was trying to get at is it's a symbol of our fear, and that happens not just with the guns that we can buy and own, but also with how we view our military. We spend more money on military weapons than all the other countries combined. Our budget this year in the new bill is $1 trillion for weapons and military stuff. And he said, that's rooted in fear. We're afraid of other people, and we feel like we need to have these layers of protection that guns and military give us some sense of confidence that we'll be safe. But then this is more where I thought maybe he was going to go. How about the fear of being unloved, the fear of being different, the fear of being wrong, or the fear of being perceived as incompetent? And I've heard several people who say that our intolerance is also a sign of fear. It's based on fear. When we're intolerant of other people, it's usually because we don't understand them. We've never taken the time to get to know them, and so we're afraid of them. And that fear is expressed as anger, hatred, intolerance, treating others badly. And I think that's right. It sounds right to me.
I think it can be. I don't see tolerance as a virtue, just like per se, but human nature as it is, we tend to distrust the unknown or the unfamiliar. And, when put to the test, those fears may be founded, but prejudice by its nature is judging something before you get to know it. So you can get to know somebody and be like, yep, that's not a good character. But if you just assume, well, they're no good, you need to have enough open-mindedness to test the waters, so to speak, because people will surprise you.
Yeah. I don't remember who said this. Mark Twain was popping into my mind, but somebody said that the best way to get over your fear of other people is to travel. Just simply meet other people, get out and get to know individuals, and to find out that we probably have more in common than we have differences in most cases. All right, and then there are legitimate phobias like people who are afraid of spiders. Any others?
That spider.
Yeah. Yeah.
Get rid of that picture. Okay. All right. Do you have any
Triggering some
other?
people here.
Especially if it's crawling on me.
I lived in Texas. I'm used to tarantulas and stuff.
Oh.
Doesn't bother me.
Fear of heights,
Now that bothers me.
fear of germs.
I can't ride those little gondolas over the mountains.
No
Maybe she sticks to the mist.
I didn't know he had fears of that.
Not just her, but the girls too. They were doing it.
We have a gene, we like a rough thing.
I just sit there with my hands like, don't move.
No, I don't. It scares me to death when, we're up hiking and the kids would say, I want to go look over the cliff. Okay.
My mother had vertigo, but she said when she looked over Royal Gorge, she had to look. She said she left her finger in her finger indentations in the railing.
I forget where it was. I just saw something in the news this week about somebody who fell off a mountain because he wanted to look over the edge. Gives me heebie-jeebies.
This is a guy who's in the Air
All
Force.
right, we'll get rid of this slide for Dan. All right, so going on with people who are captive to their fears, what was it that the religious leaders in Jesus' day were afraid of? How might their lives and actions have been different had they not been afraid?
Becoming unclean or impure.
Okay, so they probably had, so their belief in the law was so profound that they thought if they became unclean, they
It would mess with their mojo.
I think that they also were afraid of being proven wrong.
Mhm.
So they didn't want to listen to others' voices or anything, because they're like, it's this way. This is what we know.
Yeah.
So,
I agree with both
Yet
of those.
within their own group, they had big discussions.
yeah,
what-
but they all shared the same beliefs.
Yeah,
And the end, or as the core, but when it was outsiders, they didn't want an outsider to come in and be like, you're doing it completely wrong.
Well, they would also, the Sadducees and the Pharisees had completely different views on like the resurrection or I forget what else was their big, well, the resurrection, I think, was life after death, or
Yes.
the resurrection was a big,
I think they were afraid too of losing their influence, their power,
yeah.
you know. That's a powerful motivator.
why this picture is related. Okay.
Well, because you got a white woman who's yelling at a
Black or black.
amplifier through a black man.
Yeah,
So
Oh.
that was from our discussion of fearing others because of their differences.
Blasting out his eardrums.
yeah, I'm wondering if you're afraid that he's gonna.
It goes more with the
Yeah.
second
Yeah.
part,
Yeah.
here, which we kind of already talked
Fear
about.
of other cultures.
So fears of other cultures, ways of life, or beliefs can lead to misunderstanding, lack of empathy, even hate and violence. What fears do you think are holding our nation and others captive, and how might they be overcome? And what's the value of education in fixing it? Any of those?
A lot of people, go ahead. A lot of people fear the government, period.
Mhm.
And nowadays, the education isn't gonna fix it because it's being molded to fit the narrative. So we're taking away all of the important stuff that would help fix things and
Saying that people are doing.
whitewashing things. We're gonna have another. Yeah, it's getting worse though.
I know that, but actually, yes, no.
All right, well, I'll
Teachers
get
are
off this
doing-
slide.
teachers
Nobody
are
likes
doing
my
their
slides today.
Your slide.
Your slide.
So to what degree are people and groups aware of their fears and the captivity that results? Do you think most people that harbor those fears within are even aware that that's part of the issue?
I don't think so. People have become so entrenched in their own beliefs that they,
I
They
think there's an
believe-
underlying,
well, they're,
I
There-
think,
oh, for some, I think, but there are some that just blindly followed it.
right, but they haven't done any thinking. I
Yeah,
think there are some people who.
well, some people know
their entire
exactly what
reason
they
for
are
Why
doing.
they're doing it is
Yeah.
because of their own feeling of incompetence or whatever.
Yeah, there are some people that know exactly what they're doing. But the people that follow them, some may have an inkling, but there are others who just say, oh, yes, he said it, so it must be true. Or she said it, it must be true.
Have you ever been in a situation where you were amongst a group of people and you, as a white person, were in the minority?
Yes.
And how did that make you feel?
Ever been to Africa?
Yes.
I was very welcome. And
Yeah,
I
you were-
was, yeah, I knew that
The first time I went to IYF, was the first IYF, and there was just, I was almost too young to be there, but, there was 4 of us girls staying in a room, and down the hall was all of these, Polynesians, and all they wanted to do was come hang out in our room, and we were all like, what do we do? And it was scary because we were just women and there's all these guys overly friendly. We didn't know them at all. didn't know their culture. So we were all afraid and we just like ran to a room and shut the door and left it shut.
Did you know why you were afraid? I mean,
We were just like, okay, what's gonna happen? We didn't know, like, we had enough fear to know that guys and girls alone could be bad. And
So,
we didn't want to
yeah.
get caught in any bad situations. We didn't know anything about their culture. All we knew was they were all like, ah, we want to talk to you. We want to get to know you. And they were all from IYF, but it was just like International Youth Week.
Okay.
Yes, once we got to know them, it was better. But it was just like that first night.
Very first, that's no,
Yeah,
because they were boys, so.
That was
Yes.
probably it.
There was
Well,
no
like,
girls with them in their room, and it was like, ah.
so you have to think back, in the sixties, my dad was assigned to Haiti as the missionary down there. And in the sixties here, we were having race riots. In fact, one dinner, my brother and sister were talking about where were you when the riots started. My mother almost dropped their meal on the floor. She's like, because they were talking casually. So that was happening. My father flies down, a white guy in a country of black people. And he said, I had that moment of, oh my gosh, because of what was going on here in our culture. And very shortly, he said, I felt welcome. I didn't feel it. It was because I was bringing that baggage from the U.S. to Haiti.
Yeah.
And even that, at that time, that country was led by a dictator, but the citizens were very kind and very sweet. And it was purely, he knew what he had brought with him.
Dorothy and Russ mentioned Africa, and that's very much the experience I had in going to Ghana. Was the people were generally very gracious. But we went out on a Saturday evening. I was with two students, a white female and a Ghanaian male, and to the shopping center, and it was packed with African young people. And I recognized that same feeling in myself of I'm uncomfortable here, and I don't know why. But we had a great time. Nobody bothered us. There was no bad interaction with anybody. And we called an Uber when we were done with our meal to go back to our lodging. And my Ghanaian friend was talking to the driver in their native language from that region. And he said he wants to know how to find it. And I said, tell him you're the only African with two white people, for crying out loud. Standing on a corner. So yeah, he found it right away.
Pretty out there.
We were
Just look.
literally we're the only two white people in a crowd of thousands.
April got to experience that at the age of 4 when we went to Thailand as well.
Yeah.
As a blonde in a country full of black-haired people. And they all wanted to touch her because blondes were revered at that time.
And who was very shy?
Yeah.
I was gonna say that could be very overwhelming.
We're gonna
was
plunge
terrifying.
forward here and
That
talk
was
about people who are captive to their beliefs. In Jesus' day, the religious leaders were captive to their interpretations of scripture, which formed their beliefs about others, and they were boxed into their self-righteousness and were very comfortable in those boxes. And Judd wrote, faith in God has been replaced. This is for the religious in Jesus' time, had been replaced by faith in words, interpretations, and judgments. And somebody mentioned their fear of being unclean because they were so their belief in the law was so great. And he also said they were unable to experience the enjoyment of anything new. So how can we be captive to our beliefs today? Is there anything we can or should do about it? Or are we okay with what we believe?
Well, we've seen examples of different societies that are built around a single person that took control of their lives. And a lot of times they are very definitely captive and can't get away.
And I think one way that we can think about this or remember this is to recall that sometimes our differences are based on personal beliefs, right? Whether it's religion or what's the best government or what's the best anything. We might have a strong opinion about that. Somebody else may have another opinion and perceive that as a difference, and that adds to our discomfort.
As Grant McMurray, I think, said at one of the conferences, and they carried that forward. We need to let the spirit breathe, let us be open to take new experiences. Think the travel, you get out, you meet people, you see just a new shade of your thoughts, and it broadens. Andy.
I would, oh, sorry, I was gonna say education, learning more, and then taking time for spiritual practices where you just let yourself be open to allow God or the Spirit to help lead you to recognize what the beliefs you're captive to that maybe need to be reformed or expanded or maybe even contracted. I don't know.
I was going to ask how many of you looking back at your lives would say there's at least one thing in my lifetime that I have changed my belief about because I learned something new. Something informed me, and I now believe differently than I did when I was 18 or something. But I think most of us probably have had the experience of, we come up against a belief that no longer seems to be serving us well, and maybe it's time for me to rethink this and learn more about it. Homophobia. Okay.
Facing your fears of just, yes, scary, heights are scary, but maybe, just maybe I can get closer to the edge or ride that gondola, because I'm right there with you. I hate heights, but that's not going to stop me.
You
That's
know
not
what?
going to stop me
You don't
from
have to
going
change
rappelling
everything.
or doing anything like that, just because I know once I get to it, I'm going to enjoy it.
Three
But-
words, April. You go first.
I'm going every year at Girl Scout camp. I want to become a rappel master, but I just didn't have time.
I want to keep a healthy distance back, but close enough where it hits the over,
Yeah.
but I'm not gonna topple over.
Oh, no. I'm not going to stand on
Do
it.
anything
I
else
don't
to
know if
get on the
I,
edge?
I don't know if I want to go to Japan, but don't they have something at the Grand Canyon now where you can walk out on a
The glass.
plastic road?
Yeah, the glass.
No.
I'm not the biggest fan of that one because glass breaks.
They have one, the Cedar Star in Chicago has that.
All right, next one, people who are captive to traditions. Healthy appreciation of the value of tradition helps us to understand that past ways of doing things had value. Knowledge of our traditions and the benefits they brought moved us into the future. And so traditions and beliefs are a little bit tied that way. They probably had a lot of benefit at some point in our existence or our existence as a church. So what happens when we become captive to traditions, and when might that be a problem?
We're seeing that right now.
In what ways?
We're seeing that right now in our country.
In our country? Okay.
Move the homeless out. Okay, took care of that problem. No,
Now we're just homeless someplace else.
they're just homeless someplace else. I
Yeah, but
mean,
you're not seeing them.
that's-
so
you're
that-
Yeah,
seeing
out of
that.
sight.
We're addressing this problem. Pretending that certain historical events didn't happen.
Or
We
there
just
was,
take it out of the museum or out of the book, it didn't happen. It's just pretending that we don't have some bad.
yeah,
Oh,
Racism. Prejudice against the homeless.
are those traditions or are those just beliefs?
I think people choose the good thing that they want to remember about something and hang on to that.
that's
And
what,
forget that with evolution comes
Yeah.
new understandings, and sometimes you have to change that, but you want to hang on so tight
Mhm.
to the thing you liked about it
Mhm.
that you kind of forget
So
that.
the tradition is, we are a country that is improving, so I'm trying to understand. I mean, we're gonna, we talk too much about slavery in our museum instead of talking about how much we've done since slavery. But I don't think that's true. I don't think it's. I think museums show it all. Well, and honestly, I think it's important to see
we have one
the
museum.
progress, because after slavery, the 13th Amendment didn't solve things, it became a new problem and then another problem. And so we're kind of forcing ourselves into the future. So I think it's all that.
We haven't healed. We haven't healed from those original things, so it still is festering and festering.
I do.
But-
Because
Some
we were,
people don't like to dwell on the negative. That's what the argument is. I hear.
yeah,
I think.
but until we deal with it, we can't get past it.
So,
I'm trying to
So
understand. I really
perhaps
am.
the tradition was that we traditionally wiped a lot of that information from our history books. And now we've, probably the last couple of decades, we've had more people
We've
saying,
put
no,
it
we've
in.
got to confront all of it. We got to see who we were at those times in history. Now we're kind of going back the other way.
And-
Why? So that brings me to the next question that I'm going to ask here. Why do you think the traditional ways of doing things seem to feel more comfortable?
Because we're familiar with it.
Okay, because it's familiar.
That's the way we've always done it.
Yeah,
What's that?
the way we've always done it.
The way we've always
It
done it?
was
Okay.
good enough for Dad, it was good enough for me.
Well, and kind of in the context of what we're talking about, it seems like staying with the traditional ways of things keep me from having to confront my own
yeah,
guilt about
we're saying-
something,
Yeah,
my own
yeah.
contribution to doing things in a way that maybe it could be done better.
In a way, I'm stuck on traditions because I still remember growing up in Mapleton Church that my grandfather and his friends built in 1916, 1917. And I still remember those traditions and the preachers there and the subject matter, what they preached. It seemed, I remember they preached a lot about forgiveness and repentance and right out of the Bible, teaching us, behavior and salvation and even the reality of hell and how to avoid it and all of this. In fact, I was reading the minutes of my church the other day, rereading them from 1911 when the church was established up until 1971. And in 1915 or 16, there was a man who was a member of the Mapleton congregation. And he either, I think he committed adultery. Anyway, they in the church, they asked him if he would repent. He refused to repent. And I'm not saying that this was right or anything. I'm just saying this was the tradition back then. Because he had an opportunity to repent of the adultery and he refused. And he said, I'll just call him Smith. He said, well, Brother Smith, or Brother Jones or whatever, you are no longer a member of the Mapleton branch. And so just like that, he was no longer a member of the RLDS church.
I would say the tradition of inviting people to a state of repentance is one that maybe we ought to hang on to. Are there traditions in Community of Christ that we're probably better off not bringing forward with us? I'm going to share one, 60-minute sermons. I don't think we need 60 minutes.
That's the way they handled
listened
things
to
back
them.
then, okay?
And-
He had an opportunity to
Mhm.
ask for forgiveness. They gave him an opportunity, he refused, so that's the way they handled it back then.
Yeah, that's church discipline, and I think it served a purpose.
Yeah.
One can argue about how harsh that was. But yeah, tradition, I don't know who said it, but they said that tradition is the democracy of our ancestors, or it's the democracy of the past. It's, bringing the best forward and discarding the rest. The problem is when a tradition becomes calcitrant and it's like when a tradition overlives its charter and is no longer useful, that's when it becomes an issue.
And I think that's become especially important as we've looked to becoming a world church in the last 5 or 6 decades, starting 61 years ago with the instruction from W. Wallace Smith about don't get too high. I'm not going to read the whole thing. You can go look that up in the 147th section of the Doctrine and Covenants. But he's basically saying, you know, a new church and new ways of doing things are going to require the traditions and on the old stuff so much. And starting in 161.5 from Grant McMurray and just about every other revelation that's been given since that address the same issue. You know, be respectful of the traditions, listen carefully to each other, but don't feel bound in every situation. The tradition has to guide the church going forward because we're going to experience new things and we're going to have to come up with new ideas.
If I
Well,
remember
all I can
right, I
think
don't
of-
think he was kicked out of the church. He was kicked out of the
The
Lincoln
branch.
congregation.
My thought
Because
is,
they would have took the church court to kick him out of the church itself.
I'm seeing the whole story of Fiddler on the Roof.
I was,
When we're talking about that, because he was so steeped in tradition, but each of his daughters brought a new piece of that being pulled away. And he had to bend to it, and it wasn't easy. He's screaming at one time about it. And then he's asking God, well, I can go forward, stop me if I should, but, you know, I think, you know, that's a great persona of the accepting that
yeah,
we're moving forward. And it's not as simple. We remember traditions that's very simple. We don't remember all the baggage that goes around that. We take the best and we move forward.
All right, I got 5 more slides and 2.5 minutes. So
Go
I'm
for
gonna
it.
zip through these.
You
So,
get- you get a few minutes. because you had a
people
bad-
who are captive to any new thing, this is kind of the opposite end of the spectrum from people that are overly tied to traditions. There's potential downsides of this, and some people, everything that they hear, they want to, you know, go down the new pathway without really evaluating the usefulness to the church. And so we have to find the right balance between the two of those.
I'm glad he included that. I have another quote. Somebody said, "Those who are wedded to the current age will be widowers in the next age." So, you know, don't get too wrapped up in novels.
All right, and then people who are captive to addictions, the obvious things are drugs, alcohol, tobacco, gambling, and so forth. Anything that triggers dopamine, which is a little neurotransmitter that makes us feel good, that releases that in the brain. But other addictions, the pursuit of power, status, and wealth. Think of what Jesus taught in the New Testament about the love of money. One person's addiction to wealth may be supporting the poverty of many others, and so you can't be addicted to wealth without impacting the well-being of other human beings. Consumerism, you know, it's all we got to do is go online. In fact, I did it this morning and ordered some new filters for my vacuum cleaner from Amazon.
I don't know.
I don't consider that consumerism. I've got to be able to sweep the floor, right? So questions to think about: what could be done on a national or international scale to bring about a more equitable distribution of resources? I think Brother Judd was talking about sort of the socialist agenda that most churches have, that we want to care for others, and certainly the notion of shalom and peace being the opportunity for every human being to have the opportunity for a good life. I'm not talking about socialism in terms of political content. I'm talking about appreciating that everybody has the right to have a good life. So how do we get released from such captivity? Maybe you've seen these little drawings about the difference between equality and equity. Equity here is kind of my idea of what shalom looks like, that we enable each person according to their needs to be able to live life on their terms. And then we talked about people who are captive to guilt and shame quite a bit in the previous book. So this more is I think about accepting grace. Okay, we can preach grace, but if we don't accept that God forgives us and we continue to carry our guilt and our shame within us, then grace has not been manifest to us. Okay, it's simply a concept. It's not real in our lives. Grace becomes real in our lives. Yeah. So a couple of quotes there. Paul Tillich says, "Simply accept the fact you are accepted." Paul Bennett says, "The energy for grace is abundant, but only becomes manifest when we allow ourselves to feel forgiveness. Grace is freely given, but we also must freely accept it. The same freely.
Well, and I also liked by accepting powerlessness, because that's one of the first steps in a 12-step program, is acknowledging you were powerless over the situation, which can bring
All right, I'm gonna cut it off there. Thank you. Sorry, we had a little bit of a late start, so that's what I think threw us off on our timing. Next week, chapter 4, recovery of sight to the blind, and who's teaching next week? Okay.
Yeah, this is long.